I was familiar with the Dragon Warrior series because I seen them in Nintendo Power magazines and in the local video store. But I never picked them up. I was more into Zelda and other games at the time. 30 years later, there's 11-something entries in the main series, plus a ton of bonus games. It's really daunting to get into them all of a sudden. It's like jumping into Final Fantasy, never playing one before. Where do you start? What's the story like? How does it all connect? I sat down and researched this confusing series for a few weeks, and it got even more confusing. Chronologically confusing, that is. So consider this video a kinda half review, half timeline explanation. But first, a message from our sponsor, Square ENIX.
Do you love Dragon Quest? Then you'll love Dragon Quest Goes Tactical in Dragon Quest Tact.
Journey to the world of Orcus Terra and battle the forces of evil. Released exclusively in Japan less than a year ago, Dragon Quest Tact is now available in our App Store and on Google Play. Both versions are free to play. Befriend and collect classic Dragon Quest monsters and use them to build your team. Orchestrate your monster's movements in this pocket-sized tactical experience. Study the battlefield and outwit your foes on the go. The pick-up-and-play controls and deep tactical elements are fun for beginners and experts. Oh, and remember that monsters of all rarity levels and strengths have a place in battle. Resourceful players will be rewarded on the battle road, where a variety of monsters will be required. Thankfully, the ever-growing list of monsters are freely attainable.
Experience the newest entry in the RPG franchise that started it all by clicking the link in the description and downloading Dragon Quest Tact today.
For a limited time, you will receive a free King Slime. Full disclosure, the rest of the information in this video is from my own viewpoint and research. It's not a part of the sponsored content. With that out of the way, let's start by taking a trip way back to the year 1986. At this point in the past, the NES was already out in North America and had taken the nation by storm. We got some good games that year, but overseas, the NES's Japanese counterpart, the Famicom, saw the release of classic titles that would change gaming forever: The Legend of Zelda, Castlevania, Metroid, and Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest is often credited as being the first Japanese role-playing game ever, predating even Final Fantasy. The game was published by the ENIX Corporation in Japan, the company that would eventually merge with Squaresoft, forming Square ENIX. The creators of the game, Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura, wanted to take the computer RPGs they saw in the West and simplify them for console players. And so Dragon Quest was born, and is now one of the oldest and most beloved games in Japan, with 11 main entries and many different spin-offs. The games are all about action and exploration, putting players in the shoes of a silent hero that they name themselves. In Dragon Quest, you typically solve problems in each town by using clues from townspeople and fight your way across a landscape full of colorful monsters with fast, turn-based combat. The games give a real sense of adventure. It's no wonder the series is considered a classic. But with so many different games, spin-offs, animated series, and more, it makes you wonder if they're all connected in any way. So far, from what I could find, there has never been an official Dragon Quest timeline published by Square ENIX. The game's creator has also never mentioned a timeline, and he often avoids the question apparently. However, dedicated fans have pieced together enough clues to link the games to one another, which I'll get into soon, but let's start with the actual release order. Japan got Dragon Quest in '86, and it was so successful that Nintendo of America decided to bring it over in '89. Only it didn't come out as Dragon Quest. It came over as Dragon Warrior. Yeah, that's right. You see, there was already a Dragon Quest game over here, a pen and paper role-playing game called Dragon Quest, one word. They already had the trademark, and that didn't even expire until 2003. So, unlike Final Fantasy, which only changed up the number order, Dragon Quest got its name changed, and it stayed that way for an entire decade. Plus, Dragon Quest sounds like an RPG, whereas Dragon Warrior sounds like a fighting game, like Double Dragon. So I can see why kids in the 90s like myself got confused by this whole thing, or were turned off from the series. And it doesn't help that the box art was even changed over here. The Japanese version has this colorful, expressive, cartoony cover art for Dragon Quest, while the West got this much more serious but generic fantasy art. These two boxes have a totally different tone. The Dragon Warrior art looks like it would be painted on the side of some badass van, but honestly, the Dragon Quest box has a nice, unique look. But I guess someone thought the anime look wouldn't sell here, which is probably right, but I think it turned off more people by being so generic. Back on track. Quest 2 came out in 87, Warrior 2 in 90, Quest 3 in 88, Warrior 3 in 92. I should mention, these games all use Roman numerals, like Final Fantasy and Rocky, well, until they stopped numbering Rocky. Anyway, Quest 4 was in 90, and Warrior 4 was in 92, the same year as Warrior 3. Damn it! After the release of Warrior 4, ENIX America Corporation closed down, so we wouldn't even see Dragon Quest 5 or 6 in the West until the remakes on the Nintendo DS 17 years later. Yeah, almost every game in the series has been remade, by the way, but we'll get into that soon. So Western fans of Dragon Warrior, who just finished 4, had to wait 8 years to play another localized game in the series, with Dragon Warrior 7 in 2001. And at that point, people were thinking, well, what happened to Dragon Warrior 5 and 6? Good question. To add to the confusion, Dragon Quest VIII came to the West in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, this time with its correct Japanese title, Dragon Quest. They finally dropped Warrior since that pen and paper game finally lost its trademark to the name Dragon Quest. So then, people who were waiting for Dragon Warrior 8 were now getting Dragon Quest 8 all of a sudden. What a mess. After 8, we got 9 in 2010 for the Nintendo DS, and then we got 11 in 2018. Wait, hold on a second. Dragon Quest 11? 11 doesn't come after 9. What happened to Dragon Quest 10? So Dragon Quest X was never released outside of Japan. They skipped it in the West and went straight to 11. 10 came out in 2012 as an MMORPG for the Wii, and since had multiple expansions and moved on to the PS4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. It's currently the only mainline Dragon Quest game that was never released in the West. Well, that sucks. It looks alright. So Dragon Quest XI is the most recent game in the series, but we still haven't accounted for the fact that there's over a dozen spin-offs, an anime series with an original story, several side novels, and almost every game in the series has been remade with new story elements that link the games together even more. That's a lot to take in. So where do we start? Well, there's no better place to start than the beginning. In Dragon Quest I, you play as the Scion of Erdrick. The story is simple. You're the descendant of a hero known as Erdrick, who lived long ago and defeated the evil Dragon Lord, saving the land of Alfgard. Well, many years later, the Dragon Lord is back and ready for revenge. He kidnaps the princess and steals the Ball of Light, bringing darkness and despair to the land. It's up to the Erdrick's descendant to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and reclaim the Ball of Light. The game sees players travel an open map, going between towns and solving problems for the townspeople. They work their way through the game, leveling up by fighting monsters until they reach the Dragon Lord and eventually defeat him, saving the land. What's even more interesting is how much of the game you can skip over in one sitting. Get a load of this. The princess is hidden in a cave to the east, guarded by a green dragon, and it turns out you don't even have to save her. You can just defeat the Dragon Lord and that's it. What an asshole. If you do this, she doesn't even appear in the final scene where the king and townspeople congratulate you. Talk about a dick move. However, it's safe to say that saving the princess is what you should do, as Dragon Quest II is a direct sequel to Dragon Quest I, and the princess is important plot-wise. At the end of Dragon Quest I, the hero and the princess set off to establish kingdoms throughout the world outside of Alfgard, and then in Dragon Quest II, you play as one of their descendants, the Prince of Middenhall, who grew up as royalty in this world 100 years later. Oh, and in Dragon Quest II, you don't just play as one descendant of Erdrick, no, you play as 3. The Prince of Middenhall teams up with his cousins from neighboring kingdoms, so with the Princess of Moonbrook and the Prince of Connacht, you're an unstoppable force against the monsters that roam the land. Well, aside from the Prince of Connacht dying after every single battle, I'm serious, this guy dies so easily. For half the game, it'll just be you and the princess dragging around his coffin. Anyway, in this game, your nemesis is Lord Hargan. You find him, kill him, and bring peace to the land. So far, it's very straightforward. Dragon Quest I is first, and then Dragon Quest II is the direct sequel. The timeline, however, gets a little tricky when we start Dragon Quest III. 1 and 2 took place in the same world, but as far as I can see, the world of Dragon Quest III is totally different. As a matter of fact, it looks exactly like our real world. I mean, look at this. There's North America, South America, Australia, Africa. You could probably find your own house in this game. Well, as it turns out, Dragon Quest III is not a sequel to Dragon Quest II at all. No, it's actually a prequel to Dragon Quest I, Castlevania style. In Dragon Quest III, you play as an ordinary hero sent off on a journey to defeat the archfiend Baramus, with companions you create and customize yourself. After defeating the archfiend, the hero falls to the Dark World, another dimension which looks eerily familiar. Well, it turns out he fell to an ancient version of Alfgard, and after defeating the true final boss there, the hero is deemed worthy of the title of Erdrick. So, in Dragon Quest III, you play as the legendary hero who is mentioned countless times in the first two games, and you see for yourself how the legend began. I have to admit, that's pretty badass and well thought out for the time. And so the first three games are very clearly connected and often dubbed the Erdrick Trilogy by fans. Now is where things really take a turn. Dragon Quest IV has practically nothing to do with the first three games. It takes place in a brand new world with a brand new cast of characters. Well, it turns out Dragon Quest IV marked the beginning of a new era for Dragon Quest. Often dubbed the Zenithian Trilogy by fans, these games consist of Dragon Quest IV, V, and VI. They have a lot of elements linking them together, particularly Zenithia Castle, which is a flying castle in the sky, and it appears in all three games. Dragon Quest V slowly reveals itself as a direct sequel to Dragon Quest IV, set in the far-off future as the hero of this game is on the search for the descendant of the Dragon Quest IV protagonist. The Zenithian equipment from Dragon Quest IV appears in V. These are the legendary items the hero has to collect: the Zenithian sword, shield, armor, and helm. Also, the Zenith Dragon, the protector of the world, appears in both games as well, so it's pretty obvious that Dragon Quest V takes place after Dragon Quest IV. What's a little more tricky is Dragon Quest VI. The fans seem to agree that 6 is a prequel to 4, the same way 3 is a prequel to 1. Some evidence includes Cloud's Gate Citadel, which is clearly supposed to be an early Zenithia castle. There's even a King Zenith who rules over it. So great! Now we have two completely unrelated trilogies, and they aren't even in chronological order. The timeline goes forward, then backwards, and it does this twice for two different continuities. And it gets even more weird. After Dragon Quest VI, we've got Dragon Quest VII, and at first it seems like there's no connection at all to previous entries. The game is about a trio of kids piecing together fragments of the past one by one, and it takes place in a world that we don't think we've seen before. But once again, the fans of Dragon Quest really dug deep and discovered a connection. It turns out there's a spin-off title that was released later that ties Dragon Quest VII with the Erdrick Trilogy. Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart for the Game Boy Advance. It sees Prince Kiefer, one of the main characters from Dragon Quest VII, going on an adventure in the world of Dragon Quest II, implying that Dragon Quest VII takes place hundreds of years in the future after the Erdrick Trilogy. If it wasn't enough, an official manga for Dragon Quest VII even confirms the relation, showing that Kiefer is directly descended from the Prince of Middenhall in Dragon Quest II. So these little details link a game that seems completely standalone to a previous game in the series. Dragon Quest VIII is a similar situation. At first it seems like it has nothing to do with previous games. The game takes place in a brand new world. It stars a hero and his band traveling across the land searching for an evil jester. You would think that this is a brand new start for the series, but no. If you look into the game a little more, it seems to be linked to the Erdrick Trilogy yet again. In Dragon Quest VIII, you eventually meet a giant bird goddess who flies around named Empiria. She lets the party know that hundreds of years ago, she was named Ramia, which is the name of the giant bird that you fly in Dragon Quest III, implying that 8 takes place in the future of 3. So far, seems like a lot of these games are connected to 3. Now is where we get to 9. Is that part of the Erdrick Trilogy? Is it part of the Zenithian Trilogy? No, 9 has practically nothing to do with the previous games, and 10 doesn't either. They take place in different worlds with different mythologies. They feature a new version of the World Tree and a different goddess than in previous games. though they seem to be connected to each other by a shared mythology, leading some fans to believe that 9 and 10 might be a duology of their own. Dragon Quest XI, which is the most recent entry in the series, actually does a really good job of solving some timeline inconsistencies. Throughout the game, players are misled into thinking that this is yet another sequel to 3, just like we've seen a million times now. The main character of this game is known as the Luminary, and he goes on a journey following in his own ancestors' footsteps, much like in the first Dragon Quest. However, it pulls the rug out from underneath you, and at the end reveals that Dragon Quest XI is actually a prequel to 3, and chronologically, the very first game. Oh boy. The Luminary earns the title of Erdrick himself at the end, being the first person to obtain this status. The final scene even shows the hero of Dragon Quest I setting off on his own adventure many years later. That's pretty conclusive evidence to me, but here's where an already confusing timeline gets even more confusing. So now, the Erdrick Trilogy is actually the Erdrick Quadrilogy. Well, that's like a trilogy but with 4 entries. Yeah, we're getting real technical now. One thing that really annoys me is when a non-linear timeline branches off. A somewhat popular theory is that the events of Dragon Quest XI led to the timeline splitting in multiple directions, leading to the Zenithian Trilogy and the Erdrick Trilogy as different timeline branches, just like Ocarina of Time did with the Zelda timeline. I mean, that would at least explain all the differences between the two trilogies and put a ton of questions to rest. At the end of Dragon Quest XI's second act, you have the choice of traveling back in time to undo the damage that the main villain caused and stop him much earlier in the story before it's too late. The theory goes that when the Luminary goes back in time, he leaves behind a ruined world with no more descendants of Erdrick and a shattered legendary sword. You see, there's 3 main swords in the series: the Sword of Light, or Erdrick's sword from that trilogy, the Supreme Sword of Light from 11, and the Zenithian Sword from the Zenithian Trilogy. According to this fan theory, the Luminary's Supreme Sword of Light was broken due to the time jump and then later reforged into the Zenithian Sword many years later. I mean, look at them. They look very similar. This is actually somewhat believable. The Supreme Sword of Light looks closer to the Zenithian Sword than it does the Sword of Erdrick. It almost feels like this was intentional, just to fuck with the fans. The second proposed timeline is the one that the Luminary goes back to, where he saves the world early on and defeats the true final boss. This is the ending where he earns the title of Erdrick and starts a new line of heroes. I think it's pretty obvious that this timeline leads to the events of 3, which leads to 1, 2, 4, and 8 as well. So far, we have 2 potential timelines. First, the hero-less timeline, where the Luminary disappears, leading to 6, then 4, then 5, and then the hero timeline, where the Luminary defeats the true final boss, leading to 3, then 1, then 2, then 7. And 8 fits somewhere in there. I don't really know exactly where. And then you have 9 and 10, and nobody seems to know where these ones fit in. Are they part of the Zenithian saga? Are they part of the Erdrick saga? Or is there a third timeline branching off 11? Who can tell? You know, it's amazing how simple the timeline started and how convoluted it eventually got. We've got prequels, sequels, prequels to sequels, sequels to prequels, and games that don't seem to fit anywhere. It's almost like there isn't a timeline, but at the same time, there's many hints and references pointing to one. And if you thought the mainline Dragon Quest games made this timeline overwhelming, we haven't even factored the spin-offs into this. Dragon Quest Monsters stars a younger version of Terry from 6, so it must take place in the Zenithian timeline, and its sequel, Dragon Quest Monsters 2, takes place afterwards. Dragon Quest Builders takes place in an alternate timeline, branching off of one where the hero chooses to side with the Dragon Lord instead of defeating him. And Dragon Quest Builders 2 takes place in an alternate timeline to Dragon Quest 2, making this timeline splinter off even more. And I can't really figure out where some spin-off titles like Dragon Quest Sword fits in. And if that didn't make enough sense, you then have remakes, and here's where it gets really screwed up and downright contradictory. Most games in the series have been remade for newer platforms, and several of these remakes add cameos and nods to other Dragon Quest games. Dragon Quest III's remake for the Game Boy Color added Cloud's Gate Citadel from 6 as a bonus dungeon, linking the Erdrick Trilogy to the Zenithian Trilogy. And Dragon Quest VIII's remake for the 3DS added Erdrick's sword from the first 3 games, and Estark, a boss from 4, also appears. If that wasn't enough contradictions for you, Stella, a character from 9, appears in the 3DS version of 8, which makes no sense at all, as 9 takes place in a different world. So what do we trust? The original versions of the games or the remakes? If we're going with the remakes, well then you might as well throw out the whole timeline. It makes no sense. It's a weird situation. On one hand, there's games in the series that are clearly related to each other and deliberately planned to be part of a unified timeline, being the first 3 games. Then you have a second trilogy of games that are also related to each other, which is all thrown away when you bring in the standalone games, which have minor references to the first trilogy, and then you have games that don't seem to fit anywhere, but have numerous cameos and nods to both trilogies. What this all comes down to is that maybe there isn't some big grand timeline for the Dragon Quest series after all. At first, it really seems like the creators did plan a single continuity with how deeply connected the first 3 games are, but it's likely they decided to stop making the games so clearly connected after the 3rd game, so that both new and old fans alike could enjoy any game in the series without worrying about previous entries. Kind of like how you can basically just hop into any Final Fantasy game without worrying about the other plot lines. And that's exactly how it went for me. My first Final Fantasy game was 3 on Super Nintendo, which was 6 in Japan. And did that matter? No, it didn't. I mean, Dragon Quest is all about accessibility, and every game is a brand new, self-contained adventure, with challenging combat, lovable characters, and epic stories that can be enjoyed by anyone, regardless of their history with the franchise.
The timeline is left vague on purpose, so if you want to get into Dragon Quest, don't worry about some timeline or chronological order or anything. Just pick any of the games and just play it. They're all solid.